Imagine your favorite local corner diner.
Oh, yeah. The one that's, like, been there for
Right,
decades.
where literally everyone knows everyone. And suddenly you walk by and they're boarding at the windows with this handwritten, closed indefinitely sign just taped to the glass.
It's a brutal image.
It is. And meanwhile, your kids are sitting at the kitchen table, sent home from school for who knows how long, just staring blankly at a grid of faces on an iPad.
Yeah, that imagery is completely burned into our collective memory at this point.
Absolutely. And, Dr. Anthony Fauci largely became the public face of this entire period. But the roots of the public's lingering anger, it goes much, much deeper than the partisan shouting matches we still see dominating television networks today.
It really does. It's not just about the talking heads.
Exactly. So today, we're going to unpack the anatomy of a public trust crisis. Specifically, we're examining the deep, unresolved disconnect between public health institutions and everyday citizens that just kind of fractured during the pandemic.
And it is a massive, complex topic. So to do it justice, we have a really compelling stack of sources to guide us on this deep dive.
What are we looking at today?
Well, we are anchoring things with an excerpt from a comprehensive piece titled "The Shattered Shield,
Me?
Public Health and the Trust Crisis."
Okay, sounds heavy.
It is, yeah. But we're also integrating our recent PBS News analysis, grounding our discussion with some local community updates from URBT News, and then looking at the macro solutions through a perspective piece from Health Policy Watch.
That is a great stack. But, before we really look at the mechanics of this trust crisis, I need to make something very clear right up front.
Yeah, this is important for you listening to hear.
Definitely. Today's sources cover highly politically charged events, and they involve figures from all across the political spectrum, both left-wing and right-wing.
Right.
We're not here to take sides, endorse any political viewpoints, or cast judgment. Our goal as your guides is simply to impartially report what is in these source materials and basically just help you understand the ideas they present.
Perfectly said. And, to understand why that public trust shattered in the first place, we really have to look at exactly where the breaking point occurred.
Right, like where on the map?
Exactly, because the analysis in The Shattered Shield moves the focus out of those sterile briefing rooms in Washington, D.C., and places it directly into your backyard.
Which is where it actually matters for most people.
Right. Because for working class Americans, the guidance coming down from high-level federal agencies didn't feel like abstract scientific modeling.
No, it felt real.
Yeah, it felt like an immediate, tangible disruption to their basic survival.
I mean, you had a situation where local family-owned businesses were forced to close down forever simply because they couldn't afford to adapt.
While the massive corporate giants, like the big box stores with massive supply chains, they were just allowed to remain open and thrive.
Yeah, completely unchecked.
Okay.
And school doors were literally padlocked, forcing working parents into this agonizing, impossible choice.
Do I keep my job to feed my family, or do I stay home because my 7-year-old cannot be left alone?
Exactly. It's like being told by a weatherman to weather a massive, catastrophic storm, but half the town is given a reinforced, climate-controlled bunker.
Like the corporate giants and the remote worker.
Yes, exactly. While the working class is handed a leaky umbrella, and all the while, the weatherman is on a loudspeaker telling everyone, we're all in this together.
That leaky umbrella concept, it perfectly captures the reality on the ground, especially when we look at the URBT news updates in our stack.
What do they show?
Well, those updates detail how these economic and social fractures aren't just memories from a few years ago, they are ongoing realities.
They're still happening today.
Yeah, communities are still dealing with the long-term loss of small businesses that served as neighborhood anchors and the widening educational gap for students who just didn't thrive on digital learning.
Because the people suffering the most acute economic pain just felt entirely unseen by the decision makers who were operating from those metaphorical bunkers.
Exactly. The policies were largely crafted by individuals who could seamlessly transition to working from home via a laptop.
Right, sweatpants and Zoom calls.
Right. But they were applied broadly to a workforce whose jobs required physical presence and daily interaction.
So if you are the one standing in the rain with that leaky umbrella, bearing the brunt of the economic pain, you are naturally going to scrutinize the justification for your suffering.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, people can endure a tremendous amount of hardship if they actually believe the science behind those life-altering rules is rock solid.
Right, if there's a good reason.
But the sources reveal a startling admission that completely recontextualizes that pain, specifically regarding the 6-foot rule for social distancing.
Yeah, and social distancing was the absolute bedrock of the pandemic experience. It completely reshaped how human beings interacted globally.
It changed everything.
But during a recent congressional hearing, Dr. Fauci was asked about the origin of that specific 6-foot measurement, and his response was jarring.
What did he say?
According to the text, he admitted that the rule, quote, sort of just appeared.
Wow. Sort of just appeared.
Yeah, and he went on to characterize it as an empiric decision that wasn't based on data.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I want to play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
We were dealing with a fast-moving, totally novel virus. Isn't it completely normal for science to evolve as we learn more?
Of course it is.
So why did this specific admission about the 6-foot rule feel like a profound betrayal to the public rather than just a, routine scientific update?
What's fascinating here is that the public generally understands that the scientific process is a work in progress.
Right. Nobody expects magic.
Exactly. It's the definition of an empiric decision that forms the crux of the issue here.
How so?
Well, in the medical field, an empiric decision means making a practical judgment based on observation, historical precedent, or educated intuition.
Rather than waiting for a controlled, data-driven trial.
Right, because when facing an unknown threat, public health officials often have to rely on empiric decisions. They simply don't have the time to run a 6-month double-blind study before acting.
They just have to make an educated guess based on how similar respiratory viruses behave.
Exactly. But the way it was communicated on the ground didn't reflect that it was an educated guess.
No, not at all. It was presented to the public as an immutable law of physics.
And that is the fracture point. The anger wasn't caused by the scientific process itself.
It was caused by the absolute certainty with which that fragile science was enforced.
Yes. Think about the physical reality of the 6-foot rule. Stores spent millions installing plexiglass barriers and mapping out those little floor stickers.
Oh man, the floor stickers everywhere.
Right. Small business owners were threatened with severe financial fines or even the total loss of their operating licenses if they couldn't keep their customers perfectly spaced out.
And children suffered severe social isolation and developmental delays.
Exactly. All of these severe, inflexible penalties were built on a foundation that the decision-makers knew was a soft, empiric guess.
The penalty for non-compliance was absolute, but the data behind the rule was soft.
You can't demand unquestioning compliance while simultaneously masking your own uncertainty.
You really can't, because when the truth comes out, the public doesn't just see a scientific model being updated. They see a completely broken social contract.
Which naturally brings up the question of enforcement.
Right. Who's actually making you do this?
Exactly. If the science behind these mandates was admittedly a work in progress, everyday citizens were left looking around their hometowns wondering, who is actually forcing my local diner to shut down based on this soft data?
Right. Who is the citizen supposed to hold accountable?
But the shattered shield points directly to what it calls the accountability gap.
Ah, the accountability gap. That explains the bureaucratic tennis match that basically left the everyday citizen caught right in the middle.
How did that play out?
Well, the structure of our government means that federal agencies like the CDC, they don't actually have the authority to close a local school or shut down a neighborhood restaurant.
Right. They just issue guidance.
Exactly, what they officially categorize as recommendations. But local authorities, mayors, governors, and school boards, they quickly took those federal recommendations and adopted them as rigid, non-negotiable legal mandates.
Meaning you had to comply to keep your job or go to school?
Yep. And when citizens pushed back against their local city councils or mayors about the harshness of these local mandates, those local leaders shielded themselves from the political blowback.
By using a very specific phrase.
Yes. They told their constituents they were simply following the science.
Wow. It's the ultimate bureaucratic shield.
It really is.
Yeah.
It takes human judgment, empathy, and most importantly, accountability right out of the equation. It just shuts down any democratic debate entirely.
And if we connect this to the broader picture, you have federal officials washing their hands of the economic fallout, arguing they just provided scientific guidance and didn't force the local implementation.
Right. They just said, hey, it's just a recommendation.
Meanwhile, the local leaders are pointing up at the federal government, arguing they had absolutely no choice but to enforce those federal guidelines because, well, it was the science.
Imagine being a citizen trapped in that loop.
It sounds maddening.
It is. Your business is failing, your kid is struggling with remote learning, and every time you ask for a justification, the mayor points to Washington and Washington points back to the mayor.
The decision makers essentially built a closed loop of zero accountability.
Yes. It is no wonder people felt entirely ignored by the system.
And we also have to recognize that this closed loop of zero accountability, it wasn't experienced equally across the board.
Not at all.
It was felt most dangerously in communities that already possessed a historically strained relationship with the government.
Right. Places where trust was already basically zero.
Exactly. The Shattered Shield emphasizes the impact on working-class neighborhoods and Black communities' demographics, with a long documented legacy of possessing valid reasons to question government institutions.
Because trust was already a scarce resource in these neighborhoods, well before the pandemic even began.
Which is exactly why the delivery method of these mandates backfired so severely.
How so?
Well, when unelected public health officials suddenly appeared on television screens demanding unquestioning immediate compliance, they were attempting to withdraw from a bank of trust that they simply hadn't deposited anything into for decades.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, they relied on top-down authority in places where institutional authority has historically been a source of harm or neglect.
But, the source material highlights a really compelling reaction from these communities.
What did they do?
They didn't just wait for the accountability gap to close. And they didn't just give up. They bypassed the formal government structures entirely.
Oh, wow. Like taking matters into their own hands.
Exactly. We saw local neighborhoods organizing informal, really robust support networks.
Yeah.
They coordinated childcare for essential workers who couldn't stay home.
Because the schools were closed.
Right. And they banded together to keep local markets and food supply chains alive when the formal systems buckled.
That's amazing.
So what does this all mean? To me, it observes that trust on the ground isn't forged through televised lectures or rigid mandates.
No, definitely not.
It is built through mutual respect and tangible, localized support. When the institutions failed to provide workable solutions, the community just relied on internal solidarity.
And that grassroots resilience is vital. But rebuilding the relationship between those communities and the larger health institutions is an incredibly difficult task right now.
Yeah, because the hits just keep coming.
Exactly. The controversies haven't stopped. The environment remains totally saturated with suspicion, making any attempt at reconciliation incredibly fraught.
The sources outline several of these piling controversies that make rebuilding trust so difficult. We had the constantly shifting guidance on face masks early on, which left the public deeply confused about basic transmission.
Yeah, the messaging on that was rough.
It was. But on a much larger scale, there is the fierce ongoing debate over federal funding for coronavirus research connected to the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
And we have to be very precise with how the text frames this particular controversy.
Definitely.
The sources explicitly note that there is absolutely no established proof that federal grants created the pandemic.
Right, no proof of that at all.
However, the crisis of trust here stems from how the institutions handled the resulting questions. The grant system is highly complex. It often involves subawards, where money goes from an agency to a nonprofit and then to a foreign lab.
Right, lots of middlemen.
Yeah, this bureaucratic layering makes oversight difficult. So what fueled deep-seated suspicions wasn't necessarily definitive proof of wrongdoing, but a severe lack of immediate transparency from agencies like the National Institutes of Health when researchers and journalists started asking out where that grant money actually went.
And when people are already suffering, the economic pain of that leaky umbrella we talked about.
Right.
And they're caught in an accountability gap where nobody takes responsibility.
Yeah.
Any delay in transparency is immediately going to be interpreted as a cover-up.
It's human nature.
It is. And this lack of transparency has escalated into a massive political battle. The PBS News analysis in our stack details how this tension recently boiled over in a highly publicized way.
Yeah, the PBS report outlines a major development where a Republican-led Senate committee voted to hold Dr. Fauci in contempt of Congress.
Which is huge.
It is. And the mechanism of how this happened is crucial to understanding the current political climate. Yeah. During the proceedings, the retired doctor invoked his Fifth Amendment rights over 100 times.
And just for context for you listening, pleading the Fifth is a constitutional protection against self-incrimination.
Right. It's right. Everyone has.
It's a standard legal defense, especially in highly charged adversarial hearings, where a single misstatement can lead to perjury charges.
Yeah.
It doesn't legally mean you are guilty of a crime.
But from an optics standpoint.
Yeah. From an optics standpoint, for the everyday citizen watching at home.
Yeah.
It's devastating.
Truly.
The face of the nation's public health response, pleading the Fifth over 100 times before a Senate committee.
It is a glaring symbol of a completely broken system of trust. Regardless of the legal strategy behind it, when the dialogue between science and government deteriorates into contempt votes and the invocation of constitutional silence, the everyday citizen is left completely in the dark.
Just wondering what is actually being hidden.
Exactly.
But, with all these political battles, the contempt votes, and the dramatic headlines dominating the news cycle, it is incredibly easy to lose sight of what the community is actually asking for.
Yeah, we get distracted.
We get caught up in the political theater and completely forget the root of the problem.
Well, the Health Policy Watch perspective piece offers a really clarifying pivot away from all that noise.
What's their take?
It argues that framing this entire crisis of anger purely around the origins of the virus at the Wuhan Institute or around these dramatic congressional hearings misses the much broader point about institutional integrity.
Right, it's missing the forest for the trees.
Exactly. This raises an important question. What do the American people actually want from their public health institutions moving forward?
It's a great question.
And the answer provided by the sources is surprisingly straightforward. Americans aren't demanding perfect answers.
They aren't.
No. The public inherently understands that novel viruses are unpredictable and that scientific discovery takes time. What they are demanding is honesty.
Honesty over perfection.
Yes.
Rebuilding this credibility, according to the text, requires a fundamental shift in how experts communicate with the public. Institutions need to willingly acknowledge their mistakes.
They have to.
They need to admit when they're simply making an empiric decision, an educated guess, like they did with the 6-foot rule. And crucially, they have to stop using the phrase following the science as a political shield to deflect from the real-world, localized consequences of their policies.
It requires a massive injection of humility into our public institutions.
Humility, yeah.
The realization that institutional integrity isn't about projecting infallibility. It's about maintaining transparency.
If you don't have the concrete data yet, simply tell the public you don't have it.
Exactly. The public can handle uncertainty. What they cannot handle, and what actively destroys trust, is being patronized and penalized based on a false projection of absolute certainty.
That brings us full circle. We started this deep dive looking at the boarded-up windows of that local diner and the kids sent home with iPads exploring the uneven economic pain of the response.
The leaky umbrella.
Right. We examined how the arbitrary feeling of the 6-foot rule appearing out of nowhere felt like a profound betrayal rather than just a scientific update.
And we navigated that maddening accountability gap between the federal recommendations and local mandates.
Yeah, and we saw how underserved communities had to bypass the system entirely just to survive. Finally, we look at how piling controversies and a lack of transparency lead directly to the core public demand for institutional honesty.
It's a lot to process.
It is. So why should you, listening to this right now, care about all of this? Why spend the time digging through this stack of sources with us?
Because public health fundamentally requires public trust.
It relies on it to function. The next crisis, whether it's another virus, a natural disaster, or something we haven't even imagined yet, will rely entirely on whether this fractured foundation of trust can be repaired.
If the shield remains shattered, the next storm will be infinitely worse.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on today. We've established from the sources that rebuilding institutional trust requires our experts to step up to the microphone, drop the armor of absolute certainty, and bravely admit when they are simply guessing.
Right, to say, I don't know.
But if that's true, how do we, as an everyday society, need to change? Are we actually ready to accept and support leaders who look us in the eye and say, I don't know? Or when the next crisis hits, will we just continue to punish them for their uncertainty?
It's a heavy question.
It is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We appreciate your time, your curiosity, and your willingness to look closely at the things that matter. Until next time, take care.